Welcome back to the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we continue our series on reading Ralph Waldo Emerson's journals. We are still in the early part of his journal career, and we are on Journal 11, subtitled The Wide World Number 10. And from this we will pick up, there is a Latin quotation that is apparently from Ovid's Remedia Amoris. However, there's no translation available, and so I will not translate it, but I'll just note that it is there. Other than that, this portion begins with a annotation informing us of what was going on in Emerson's life. So I will start there. During the period which this wide world covers, perhaps in May, Mrs. Emerson and her sons moved to Canterbury, a part of Roxbury, where they hired a house in the picturesque region of the Dedham Turnpike, now a portion of Franklin Park. Waldo's health, as reflected in portions of this journal, especially the poem The Bell, seems to not have been good. There is a pleasant letter about the joy he felt in dwelling in the country, written to one of his classmates in Mr. Cabot's Memoirs, Volume 1, page 96. And now we will continue to the actual journal entries. Boston, March 18th, 1823. When God made the beasts and prepared to set over them an intelligent lord, he considered what external faculty he should add to his frame, to be the seat of his superiority. Then he gave him an articulate voice. He gave him an organ exquisitely endowed, which was the independent of his grosser parts, but the minister of his mind and the interpreter of its thoughts. It was designed, moreover, as a scepter of irresistible command, by whose force the great and wise should still the tumult of the vulgar million, and direct their blind energies to a right operation. The will of heaven was done, and the morning and evening gales wafted to the highest the harmonious accent of man. But the generations of men lived and died while yet their expanding powers were constrained by the iron necessities of infant civilization, and they had never, with perchance a few solitary exceptions, ascertained the richness of this divine gift. Suddenly, in a corner of Europe, the ripe seeds of greatness burst into life, and covered the hills and valleys of Greece with a golden harvest. The new capacities and desires which burned in the human breast demanded a correspondent perfection in speech to body them forth. Then a voice was heard in the assemblies of men, which sounded like the language of the gods. It rolled like the music on the ear, and filled the mind with indefinable longings. It was peremptory as the word of kings, or mournful as a widow wailing, or enkindling as the martial clarion. That voice men called eloquence, and he that had it unlocked their hearts, or turned their actions whithersoever he would. Like sea waves to the shore, like mountain sheep to their shepherd, so men crowded around this commander of their hearts to drink in his accents, and to mold their passions to his will. The contagion of new desires and improvements went abroad, and tribe after tribe of barbarians uplifted the banner of refinement. This spirit-stirring art was propagated also, and although its light sunk often in the socket, it was never put out. Time rolled, and successive ages rapidly developed the mixed and mighty drama of human society, and among the instruments employed therein, this splendid art was often and actively used. And who that has witnessed its strength and opened every chamber of his soul to the matchless enchanter does not venerate it as the noblest agent that God works within human hearts? My muse, it is the idol of thy homage, and deserves the dedication of thine outpourings. Emerson changes topics to time. After 2 moons I shall have fulfilled 20 years amid the fleeting generations of the human race, and in the abyss of years I lift my solitary voice unheeded and unknown, and complain unto inexorable time. Stop, destroyer, overwhelmer, stop one brief moment this uncontrollable career. Ravisher of creation, suffer me a little space, that I may pluck some spoils as I pass onward to be the fruits and monuments of the scenes through which I have traveled. Fool, you implore the deaf torrent to relax the speed of its cataract. Here follows a short Latin quotation, and there is no translation available here. How many thousands before have cast up to time the same look of fear and sorrow when they have contemplated the terrible flight of time? But this infinite extinguisher or changer of being continues his supreme agency without exception or interval. Among the undistinguished myriads thus hurried on and off the stage of mortal life, a few parted by long periods asunder have made themselves a longer memory in this world, and perchance in worlds beyond, by pouring out all their strength in the service of their fellow men. They rightly judge that if a benevolent God keeps watch in heaven over his family in the earth, the sight would be grateful to him of patient study and intense toil accomplished by magnanimous minds in behalf of human nature and for the avowed design of its improvement. Men grope, they said, in a night of doubts and falsehoods, for the light of truth is quenched or burns dimly in the midst. Come, let us restore the flame and feed it with fuel until it shall grow up again in a beacon light blazing broadly and gloriously to illuminate the world. Then our sons and our sons' sons shall walk in the brilliant light and shall pray God to bless us long after we have gone down to the chambers of death. That glorious company of martyrs who took up the cross of virtuous denial and gave their days and nights to study, meditation, and prayer were indeed blessed of heaven and earth. God, in the watches of the starry night, fed their imaginations with secret influences of divinity and swelled their conceptions with showers of healing water from the fountains of paradise. They could not contain their joy of these sweet and silent promptings, this interview, as they deemed it, between God and man, and they mounted to a constant elevation of thought, which left far below them the cankering and ignoble pursuits of life. They have left inscribed in their writings frequent and bold appeals to the grandeur of the spirit which lodged in their breasts, confident that what was writ should justify the truth of their claims. The sublimest bard of all, he who sung man's disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree which brought death into the world and all our woe, felt himself continually summoned and inspired by a spirit within him, and which afterwards, he says, grew daily upon me to do God's work in the world by sending forth strains which after times would not willingly let die. Not a work to be finished in the heat of youth or the vapors of wine, nor yet by invocation of Dame Memory and her siren daughters, but by devout prayer to that eternal Spirit, who giveth knowledge. Hereby he hoped to release, in some great measure, the hearts of posterity from that harlotry of voluptuousness, whereinto he perceived with grief his own age had fallen. A kindred genius born for the exaltation of mankind, who preceded the poet, and who fell, alas for humanity, into a snare and ruin for his integrity, did yet contribute a mighty impulse to the cause of wisdom and truth. And he also was nowise unconscious of the magnitude of the effort and the power which supported him. What follows is a poem entitled The Bell, and there is a footnote that I will read about it. These youthful verses, slightly changed for the better by Mr. Emerson a few years later, were printed in the appendix to the centenary edition of the poems. The Bell. I love thy music, mellow bell, I love thine iron chime, to life or death, to heaven or hell, which calls the sons of time. Thy voice upon the deep, the home-bound sea boy hails, it charms his cares to sleep, it cheers him as he sails. To Mary Hall, or house of God, thy summons called our sires, and good men thought thy awful voice disarmed the thunder's fires. And soon thy music, sad death bell, shall sing its dirge once more, and mix my requiem with the gale which sweeps my native shore. Emerson now takes up the subject of free thinking. It is often alleged, with a great mass of instances to support the assertion, that the spirit of philosophy and a liberal mind is at discord with the principles of religion, so far at least as to imply that hoary error that religion is a prejudice which statesmen cherish in the vulgar as a wholesome terror. Those whom genius or education have rescued from the common ignorance have openly discarded the humble creeds of men and vaunted their liberty. They have mounted, it is pretended, to some loftier prospect of man's dependence or independence upon God, and have discovered that human beings foolishly trouble themselves by their shallow and slavish fear of some great power in the universe, who notices and remembers their actions. For these clear-sighted intellects have darted their glance into the secrets of the other world, and have satisfied themselves either that there is no divinity at all, beyond the vain names and fantastic superstitions of men, or else, if there be a sphered and potent dweller in the abyss, he is incurious and indifferent to the petty changes of the world. In this confidence, therefore, these bold speculators cast off the fetters of opinion and those apprehensions which so cleave to our poor nature, and are willing to survey at ease the gorgeous spectacle of the universe, the fabric of society, and the closet of the mind, and to make themselves proud of this birthright of thoughts, this rare chance, which fell upon them they know not how, and even to vaunt of their incomprehensible immortality, if perchance they shall outlast the changes of death. This perilous recklessness I find with regret in many of the intellectual guides of these latter times, Hume, Gibbon, Robertson, Franklin, certain Scotch geniuses of the present day, and the profligate Byron, who have expressed more or less explicitly their dissent from the popular faith. Composing in themselves a brilliant constellation of minds variously and richly endowed, they have taken out its welcome influence from the cause of good will to men, and set it in the opposite scale, like the star seen in the Apocalypse. They have cast a malign light upon the earth, turning the sweet waters to bitter. That there may be a transient pleasure in such freak thinking I will not deny, nor that pride of opinion has its gratifications. I will not dispute that a man inclined so to consider it, the majesty of nature, is a puppet show of rarest entertainment, abounding with devices which will repay the toil of his curiosity. I will not deny that this disciple of Democritus may find the human soul and human society rich sources of merriment. But I shall say that laughter in the mouth of a maniac is, in my judgment, as becoming. Standing as man stands with the thunders of evil fate suspended over him, bound on every side by the cords of temptation, and uncertainty sweeping like a dark cloud before his path, is it for him, if his understanding is strong enough to appreciate this condition, to acknowledge his melancholy lot by unseasonable mirth? A sober firmness on his brow and purity in his heart is the best armor he can wear. I believe nothing is more ungrounded than the assertion that skepticism is, in any manner, the natural fruit of a superior understanding. The legitimate fruits of a master spirit are a dearer love to virtue, and an ardent and thrilling desire to burst the bonds of the flesh and begin a perfecter existence. In those moments which every wise man counts the best of his life, who hath not been smitten with a burning curiosity to rend asunder the veil of mortality, and gaze with pious violence upon the unutterable glories beyond? The names which I mention as apostate weigh nothing against the greater names of Bacon, Milton, Newton, and the like, whose hearts cleave to the divine revelations as the pledge of their resurrection to eternity. Nor can I conceive of any man of sense reading the chapter of Milton, Reason of Church Government Urged Against Prelacy, Book 2, c. 1, without his heart warming to the touch of noble sentiments, and his faith in God and the eternity of virtue of truth being steadfastly confirmed. Nothing of human composition is so akin to inspiration. Sunday evening, March 23rd, 1823. One youth among the multitudes of mankind, one grain of sand on the seashore, unknown in the midst of my contemporaries, I am hastening to put on the manly robe. From childhood the names of the great have ever resounded in my ear, and it is impossible that I should be indifferent to the rank which I must take in the innumerable assembly of men, or that I should shut my eyes upon the huge interval which separates me from the minds which I am wont to venerate. Every young man is prone to be misled by the suggestions of his own ill-founded ambition, which he mistakes for the promptings of a secret genius. It is not time, nor fate, nor the world that is half so much his foe as the demon indolence within him. A man's enemies are those of his own household. But if a man shall diligently consider what it is which most forcibly impedes the natural greatness of his mind, he will assuredly find that slothful sensual indulgence is the real unbroken barrier, and that when he has overleapt this, God has set no bounds to his progress. The maxim is true to an indefinite extent, and here is a short Latin quotation. I don't know the translation. We boast of our free agency. What is this but to say God hath put into our hands the elements of our character, the iron and the brass, the silver and the gold, to choose and to fashion them as we will? That we are afraid of the toil, we bury them in a napkin instead of molding them into rich and enduring vessels. This view is by far the most animating to exertion. It speaks life and courage to the soul. Mistrust no more your ability, the rivalry of others, or the final event. Make speed to plan, to execute, to fulfill. Forfeit not one moment more in the dalliance of sloth, for the work is vast, and time is short, and opportunity is a headlong thing which tarries for no man's necessities. Habits of labor are paths to heaven. It commands no outward austerities. Do not put ashes on your head, nor sackcloth on your loins, nor a belt of iron for your girdle, but mortify the mind, put on humility and temperance for ashes, and bind about the soul as with iron. The soul is a fertile soil, which will grow rank and to waste if left to itself. If you wish, therefore, to see it bud out abundantly and bring in harvest richer an 100 and 1,000-fold, bind it with the restraint of cultivation. March 26. It is overgrown with tares and poisons. Suffer no longer this noisome barrenness. Harrow it up with thoughts. Fill it with the joys and wholesome apprehensions of a reasonable being instead of the indifference of a brute. March 28th. These are the clamors with which conscience pursues and upbraids me. Happy if they were undeserved. Happiest could they accomplish their end. But the inscrutable future comes down in darkness, and finds us in the thrall of the same old enemies, with all our hopes and full-blown intentions thick on our heads. For your life, then, for your life, crawl on a few steps farther in the next 12 months. Here follows a poem titled A Shout to the Shepherds. Freshly, gaily, the rivulet flows beside its emerald bank. Each silver bubble in a beauty goes adown the stream and briefly glows, till it reach the broad flags and the alders dank. Shepherds who love the lay of untaught bards and oaken shades, bright-eyed Apollos of the forest glades, hither, hither, turn your way. Come to the grassy border of the brook. Here, where the ragged hawthorn dips his prickly buds of perfume in the wave, and thence again a costly fragrance sips, drinking with each balmy flowerlet's lips, pure from the naiad's welling urn, while overhead the embowering elms bow their broad branches and keep out the day. Hither, hither, turn your way. April 8th, 1823. Powerful and concentrated motive is necessary to a man who would be great, and young men whose hearts burn with the desire of distinction may complain perhaps that the paths in which a man may be usefully illustrious are already taken up, and that they have fallen in too late an age to be benefactors of mankind. Truly I wish it were so. Alas, the wildest dreams of poetry have uttered no such thing. There is a huge and disproportionate abundance of evil on earth, Indeed, the good that is here is but a little island of light amidst the unbounded ocean. What mind, therefore, that is stirred by ardent feelings looks over the great desert of human life without fervently resolving to embark in the cause of God and man, and without finding puissant motives calling out the strength of every root and fiber of his soul? But he finds the field too spacious and the motive not enough concentrated. Let the young American withdraw his eyes from all but his own country, and try if he can find employment there. Separated from the contamination which infects all other civilized lands, this country has always boasted a great comparative purity. At the same time, from obvious causes, it has leaped at once from infancy to manhood, has covered and is covering millions of square miles with a hardy and enterprising population. The free institutions which prevail here and here alone have attracted to this country the eyes of the world. In this age, the despots of Europe are engaged in the common cause of tightening the bonds of monarchy about the thriving liberties and laws of men, and the unprivileged orders, the bulk of human society, gasping for breath beneath their chains and darting impatient glances towards the free constitution of other countries. To America, therefore, monarchs look with apprehension, and the people with hope. But the vast rapidity with which the deserts and forests of the interior of this country are peopled have led patriots to fear lest the nation grow too fast for its virtue and its peace. In the raw multitudes who lead the front of emigration, men of respectability in mind and morals are rarely found. It is well known. The pioneers are commonly the offscouring of civilized society, who have been led to embark in these enterprises by the consciousness of ruined fortunes or ruined character, or perchance a desire for that greater license which belongs to a new and unsettled community. These men and their descendants compose the western frontier population of the United States and are rapidly expanding themselves. At this day, the axe is laid to the root of the forest, the Indian is driven from his hut, and the bison from the plains. In the bosom of mountains where white men never trod, already the voice of nations begins to be heard, happily heard in ominous and evil accents. Good men desire, and the great cause of human nature demands that this abundant and overflowing richness wherewith God has blessed this country be not misapplied and made a curse of, that this new storehouse of nations shall never pour out upon the world an accursed tribe of barbarous robbers. Now the danger is very great that the machine of government acting upon this territory at so great distance will wax feeble or meet with resistance, and that the oracles of moral law and intellectual wisdom in the midst of an ignorant and licentious people will speak faintly and indistinctly. Human foresight can set no bounds to the ill consequences of such a calamity, if it is not reasonably averted. And, on the contrary, if the senates that shall meet hereafter in those wilds shall be made to speak a voice of wisdom and virtue, the reformation of the world would be to be expected from America. How to effect the check proposed is an object of momentous importance, and in view of an object of such magnitude, I know not who he is that can complain that motive is lacking in this latter age whereby men should become great. Emerson changes his subject matter to compensation. The balancing and adjustment of human pleasures, privileges, and graces, so that no man's share shall outrun all competition, nor be diminished to an extreme poverty, is so obvious in the world as to be a daily topic of conversation. And the system of compensations takes place as much in the difference of good as in the apportioning of evil and good. Thus, knowledge is a good, but it must be acquired in different ways, and there is no single way which combines the advantages of all the others. The advantages which one man enjoys by access to unusual sources of improvement do, by some necessity, deprive him of admittance to other sources equally rare and rich. Is he opulent and commands the privileges of libraries and schools? He wants that vigor and eagerness to use them which necessity gives. Is he a traveler and borne by the winds to every foreign clime, and does he transact affairs amidst the famous ruins of each continent? then his taste has been uncultivated, and he views them all with indifference. Has he wit, the industry sufficient to grasp all knowledge? Poverty shuts up with the iron bars every avenue to him. Men are alike only in infancy. Afterwards, every man takes a path which leads out from the common center, and every step separates him further from all the rest. Emerson then takes up the subject of moral obligation. To what purpose is this gorgeous firmament displayed in such rich and inimitable colors, with such glorious variety? What is this curtain of darkness which is hung abroad, unaltered in its regularity, unrivaled in its grandeur? I stand in a paradise, and the pleasant winds of heaven fan me as they move, and scatter health and odors through all their outgoings. Custom has made familiar to me the marvels of the world. Nevertheless, its mighty magnificence will sometimes break upon the sense in overpowering sensations, and fill the mind with unspeakable conceptions of the cause and design, and with awful shame for its own ingratitude. But men are much more apt to let their thoughts rest in the works to behold nature without anxiety to see nature's God. It is custom, the tyrannous of fools, that suffers them to gaze vacantly upon this fair and noble miracle, this sublime, exquisite world, without exacting an unbounded homage to the author of it all. But perchance custom is right, and I owe no homage. Stand forth now and show, if thou canst, some grounds for the superlative claim upon my affections and life. For if you say well, then I am checked in that liberty which I have exercised, and, in the full view of my whole hopes, I shall be free to do right, but I shall no longer be free to do wrong. For he that is bid to go one way, and a sword is pointed to his breast, is not free to go another. Explain to me then my obligations, for else I cannot consent to resign that free and entire license to go right or to go wrong with which I hitherto believed I walked in the world's ways. Here it says infra, quote, 6, 7, 8 verses in Job, and there is a footnote that says, quote, if thou sinnest, what doest thou against him? Or if thy transgressions be multiplied, what doest thou unto him? Quote, if thou be righteous, what givest thou him? Or what receiveth he of thine hand? Quote, thy wickedness may hurt a man as thou art, and thy righteousness may profit the Son of Man. End quote. First, then, you are not your own, but belong to another by the right of creation. This claim is the most simple, perfect, and absolute of all claims. Nothing is akin to it in the universe. We cannot reason about it from analogy, but when we think of it, it is the most reasonable and satisfactory of all claims. God animated a clod of life in a corner of his dominions. By his own power he first orders it to be, to hold a passive existence as a clod out of nothing. Then he breathes into it life, and thus from an imparting of omnific virtue, a thing is which was not. Having come from himself, it is a part of himself. It takes the tone of existence from him alone. Can aught be said to be so absolutely, inevitably, unchangeably God's? Here follows a footnote which has a quote. A man is therefore to speak for truth, but who is he? Some clod the truth has snatched from the ground, and with fire has fashioned to a momentary man. Without the truth he is a clod again. End quote. This is from The Sovereignty of Ethics, Lectures and Biographical Sketches, page 194. If we conceive the divine being inflicting pain upon these creatures, we cannot satisfy ourselves that even persecution authorizes their rebellion against his will. For he has as close and near an interest in what he makes from himself as that which he makes has for itself, and for him to pain such a creature is to pain himself. We cannot reason here from analogy, for men are not creators. If a father abuses his child, forgets the ties of nature, and encroaches upon his human rights or seeks his life, the son is not left without resource. He can renounce those mutual claims which his sire has refused to respect, and divesting himself of all other support, can sustain himself on the simple grounds of natural rights. But the case is radically different with the creature of God and with the Son of Man, for the former has no ultimate and primal rights to throw himself back upon when he is induced to renounce his submission to God, for God is his maker and made those very rights which he possesses. There is no other being in the abyss of existence who might erect a hostile standard against the throne of the deity that afflicts him, about which he is disaffected, might rally in hope. There is no other separate ultimate resource, for God is within him, God about him, he is a part of God himself. Nothing therefore can destroy, nothing abridge the claim of obedience which a creator advances upon his creatures. Hence the first ground of moral obligation is this, that the being who ordained it is the source, the support, and the principle of our existence, and it were a kind of denying our nature to reject that which is agreeable to him. There is no waste, no period to the moral universe, an antiquity that is without beginning, and a futurity that is without end is its history. A principle of life and truth in itself, which it is impossible to conceive of as liable to death or suspension, or as less than infinite in the extent of its rule, binding God and man in its irreversible decree, is coexistent with deity. Here follows something like a dramatic fragment between character named Kalba and a seer and another which is called Mas, M-A-S, period, and I will read that out. Kalba. When will the plague depart? Will all my sons snuff death from the wild wind and go away to the dim land of spirits o'er the hills? Seer. The bisons fed in safety in the valley until thy sire set up his wigwam here. Now they are gone to see the setting sun. Thy people dwelt in safety in this land, but they must flee to see the setting sun. Come, let them now dig down the tree of peace, cut reeds from the rivers for their poisoned shafts, pluck up keen flintstones for their tomahawks, and battle with the thunder gods of heaven. Hear the bald eagle scream amid the clouds, his voice betokens blood, his eye glares bright. O'er the great waters to the misty isles, out of the clouds big warriors shall come, in swift canoes that fly on shining wings. I see them leap like giants on thy shore, with thunder in their hands, and thy great spirit is frighted at their gods, and leaves his skies. I tell thee, chieftain, that the coward gods fear the white tribe that ride across the deep, and hide their shamed heads. Ah, red men are few, they are few and feeble, and the eagle tribes must crumble fast away and fall in pieces. Mas. You sing the death song of my tribe, ah me. Now by my father's soul, old Kalba say, why are the tall warriors weak, and why does God suffer the wolves to lap his children's blood? Does the Great Spirit betray, or does he fear? Seer. Eagle, he loves his children, feeds them when they famish, saves them in the winter storm, and sends the pleasant summer full of joy, fattening the forest families for them. Then see thou blame him not, for he is good. Mas. Sometimes he darts his thunder at my sons. Can he not kill my enemies? Seer. There are gods besides thy God, as other tribes have chiefs besides thy own. Eagle, thy God is weak, waxing and waning like yon horned moon, the white man's God, eternal as the sun. Mas. Out on your God, I'll be my people's God. Since the Great Spirit is afraid to fight, they shall not lack an arm strong as his arm. And when the white canoes come o'er the sea, oh, may their God with me wrestle for life. Then I will fall upon them like the night, and sing my war song in their ears, and kill, and stain the waterside with crimson foam. And if my warriors fall, and if the foe prevail, then I will die as the eagle chief should die, in fight, last of a noble tribe, and white men's dying groans shall lull my last sleep. That is the end of the dramatic fragment. June 1st, 1823. Great force is given to morals if you consider the object and integrity they contribute to human life. They are strong. If they were weak, all but a faint hint, or indeed no suggestion at all, of this law were imparted to the mind, life, instead of being a noble harmonious order, would immediately become a wild and terrible dream. Men would ask one another the cause and meaning of the unexplained enigma. To what purpose stand we here? Shall a tremendous event shut up this troubled scene? These tempestuous passions of ours, come, let us gratify them, though we slay each other and ourselves also to avoid some darker calamity that uncertain existence may be storing for us. A chaos more frightful than that of nature, the chaos of thought, would make life an unsupportable curse. The intelligent universe would be deprived of the salutary restraint that supports and prolongs its awful beauty. Rend away the darkness and restore to man the knowledge of this principle, and you have lit the sun over the world and solved the riddle of life. Now man lives for a purpose. Hitherto was no object upon which to concentrate his various powers. Now happiness is his being's end and aim. One course leads to it, and the prize is secure. The distant and dark intimation of such an end, which in the total previous privation we should have hailed with rapture and have pursued with unconquerable diligence, is made to us a rich and majestic revelation. And can the zeal with which we conform to its edicts ever become intemperate? Never in the eye of God, never in the eye of the seraphim and cherubim, but often ill-timed and intemperate it would seem in the eye of men. So unerring perhaps, and so judicious is human sagacity, that it is ever loth to enter zealously into this subject, afraid it would seem of jeopardizing some whit the stately dignity of human nature by falling into a momentary enthusiasm in this inquiry. Out of this world, all the active intelligences that move in the heavens are absorbed in these views, are incessantly pursuing on the fiery wings of contemplation the wonders of God's providence into the abyss of his works. Mind, which is the end and aim of all the divine operations, feeds with unsated appetite upon the moral and material nature, that is, upon the order of things which he has appointed. It is perpetually growing wiser and mightier by digesting the immortal food. And even in our feeble conceptions of the heavenly hosts, we seek to fill up the painful chasm that divides God from his humble creatures upon earth by magnificent series of godlike intellects. Worlds like ours were the cradle of their infancy. Their minds, like ours, learned the rudiments of thought from the material creation. Their ripened and godlike understandings revere the law and study, the foundation principles of morals. But man, in his nook of earth, knits his brow at the name of his Maker, and gravely apprehends that the discussion of his laws may lead to fanaticism. It seems to me ardor and enthusiasm are the appropriate feelings which belongs to things of eternity, and makes the habits of angels. But man waxes cold and slow at the word, and fears to commit himself upon these topics in the presence of his fellow worms. June 1st, 1823. But this waywardness in the end grows to presumption, and there is a time when slighted opportunity ceases to return. Quote, "Praise is the salt that seasons right for man, and whets the appetite for moral good." A Latin quotation follows this, but there is no translation. Emerson now changes subjects to trade. Men so universally draw their characters after the pattern of their times that great regard is due to any who, spurning the character and humor of an ignoble age, act upon principles not apprehended by the vulgar. Upon this ground, we claim veneration for the forefathers of New England, who were an association of men that for once in the history of the world forgot to found their plans exclusively upon the interests of trade, and preferred to trade the finer interests of religion and literature. Trade was always in the world, and indeed, to judge hastily, we might well deem trade to have been the purpose for which the world was created. It is the cause, the support, and the object of all government. Without it, men would roam the wilderness alone and never meet in the kind of conventions of social life. Who is he that causes this busy stir, this mighty and laborious accommodation of the world to men's wants? Who is he that plants care like canker at men's hearts and furrows their brows with thrifty calculations, that makes money for his instrument, and therewith sets man's passions in ferment and their faculties in action, unites them together with the clamorous streets, or arrays them against each other in war? It is trade which is the mover of the nations, and the pillar wherein the fortunes of life hang. All else is subordinate. Tear down, if you will, the temples of religion, the museums of art, the laboratories of science, and the libraries of learning, and the regret excited among mankind would be cold, alas, and faint. A few would be found, a few enthusiasts in secret places to mourn over their ruins. But destroy the temples of trade, your stores, your wharves, and your floating castles on the deep. Restore to the earth the silver and the gold which was dug out thence to serve his purposes, and you shall hear an outcry from the ends of the earth. Society would stand still, and men return howling to forests and caves would now be the grave, as they were once the cradle of the human race. This partial and inordinate success by which this institution of men wears the crown over all others is necessary, for the prosperity of trade is built upon desires and necessities which nourish no distinction among men, which all, the high and humble, the weak and strong, can feel, and which must first be answered before the imprisonment of the mind can be broken, and the noble and delicate thoughts can issue out from which art and literature spring. The most enthusiastic philosopher requires to be fed and clothed before he begins his analysis of nature, and scandal has called poetry, taste, imagination the overflowing phantasms of a high-fed animal. True, Archimedes forgot for a moment in the Sicilian capital the rigid laws of decorum when he found the theory of the tides, and fiery poets have lived who defied the vile necessities of the flesh, and wrote obstinately on until they starved. But these are instances rare and extraordinary, and are all only quoted in evidence as miracles by which the reality of these lower revelations was to be attested. And in despite of them all, the scholar is quickly taught the unwelcome conviction that his studies are the later luxuries which the world can easily forego, whilst it cannot spare its meat and its drink and the interests of traffic which he holds in contempt. The justice and propriety of this early preference to trade we are not so blind as to doubt. We only lament the poverty of our nature, which makes us heirs to such inconveniences. But we complain that here we find new instances of the imperfection of our mind, which, by that universal misapprehension of the means for the end, after the wants are gratified which trade proposes to gratify, continues to pursue with unslaked appetite these concerns which have ceased to be necessary, to the exclusion of those nobler pursuits which bring honor and greatness upon our race. This mistake is a sore evil under the sun, and under some broad form or other offends us every day. The merchant said in his heart, I will amass treasure, and then buy me these pleasures of refinement and science. When I am free from the fear of want, I will call the muses from Helicon, and sacrifice at their altars. And he unfurled his canvas on the sea, and sent men on his errands of gain to all corners of the earth. And his purpose seemed good in the eye of the genii of the air and the mermaids of the deep. His white sails were swelled with favorable winds, and the mermaids sung pleasantly to his mariners to cheer them on their way. Ores of gold and silver, mines of diamond, and shores of pearl, spice groves of the east and plantations of the west were ransacked to heap the amount of his wealth. But when his will was done, and the progress of years added new accumulations to his wealth, in the abundance of his schemes he forgot his youthful promises for the application of his wealth. He forgot to invoke the muses and call the arts and philosophy to adorn his dwelling. Alas, he was fast yoked into the thraldom of care, painfully gathering riches for another to enjoy, and niggardly denying himself the best fruits of his toil. This history of the individual is the history of the nation. Thousands wished well to the scanty, godlike band who kindled and bore the torch of improvement through the darkness of the world, and were well nigh persuaded to abandon their own sordid pursuits and ally themselves to their cause. Nations ripened into civilization and crowded with an enlarging population the narrow confines God gave them to possess, but it was trade who sent out the superfluous numbers in the colonies to people distant territories. Phoenicia, Greece, and Rome, vaunting the liberality of their policy, had no loftier motive than the extension of their taxes and their trade. A reading selected from 29 and 30 chapters of Job admits of great eloquence. Note the pauses after now, which occur thrice. Emerson changes his topic to temptation. There is an important view, striking the very foundation of moral accountability, which I shall attempt to present. I cannot blame, for I do not feel a contradiction to divine justice in the alarming result of God's experiment on earth. Men have thought that if a fair and equal election of good and ill and their respective rewards be offered to man, it cannot be that so huge a majority of wrongdoers should burden the earth. Sin, they say, is too strong. It hath too many pleasures and too many apologies for our integrity. God should not have made it so difficult, if purity be necessary to my salvation, to be pure. I answer, if temptation were tenfold stronger than it is, I see not with what face this poor palliation of guilt could be advanced. For all the most clamorous invitations that vice ever offered, the moment they are brought into close comparison with the recompense offered to virtue, do so shrink into mute and secret insignificance that they lose every shadow of effect, nothing that ever occurred to man's fiery imagination bearing any proportion as a picture of delight to the promises granted to obedience. Epilogue, June 11th. When memory rakes up her treasures, her ingots of thought, I fear she will seldom recur to the muse's 10th son. And yet she should have been able to gather and condense something from the wealth of fancy which nature supplies in the beautiful summer. I have played the enthusiast with my book in the greenwood, the huntsman with my gun, have sat upon rocks and mused o'er flood and fell, have indulged the richest indolence of a poet, and am therefore a creditor to nature for some brilliant and unusual inspiration. But the goddess is slow of payment, or has forgotten an old bantling. If she was partial once, she is morose now. For familiarity, if awful nature will permit me to use so bold a word, breeds disgust, and vinegar is the son of wine. Peradventure I may yet be admitted to the contemplation of her inner magnificence, and her favor may find me no shrine indeed, but some snug niche in the temple of time. Tut, says fortune, and if you fail, it shall never be from lack of vanity. Labor is the son of resolution and the father of greatness, of health and wealth. The family is a very thriving one, though it is infested not uncommonly by an execrable vermin called care. And that is the end of Emerson's Journal number 11, subtitled The Wide World number 10. In the next video, we will of course take up Journal 12, subtitled The Wide World number 11. Thank you for listening.